We are so excited today to have with us Martin Preib from the Chicago Police Department, Chicago being my hometown. And Marty, you just have such an incredibly diverse career and background. You've been involved in local politics. You are an author. You're an incredible author. First, let's talk just a little bit about what it's like to be a Chicago cop these days. How different is it than, say, 20 years ago or so when you got on the job?
Well, when I got on about 18 years ago, 17 years ago, it was a lot more fun. You felt like you were getting a lot more done. It's completely different now, and I'd say the morale is very low, and the public opinion of I should say the media narrative about cops takes its toll in many forms, and has done great damage to the law enforcement and to the justice system in this country. And I'm afraid sometimes that it's irrevocable. So it's not a good time to be a police officer, particularly in cities like Chicago or Baltimore, Seattle, where this intense anti-police movement has taken deep root in our institutions.
Well, and you make a really good point. And I got on the job in 1980. And in 81, I went to the Cook County Sheriff's Police Academy. And it was a very different time then in the 80s and on into the 90s. I did a lot of work in Chicago on a narcotics task force. And the city of Chicago is an amazing, beautiful place. My youngest daughter still lives there. But now it's a very frightening place. In fact, I've wanted to go visit. I don't live there anymore, but I can't shop on the Magnificent Mile. I can't go to Grant Park. And so we talk about what's happening in Chicago, and people are surprised to find out, Marty, the number of shootings that we have every weekend in Chicago. That doesn't happen in any other major city. That's starting to change, and we'll talk about that. But for what, the past decade or so, we averaged what, 40 to 60 shootings a weekend in Chicago?
Yes, it's almost become sort of accepted in Chicago that each weekend, particularly in the summer, is going to be sort of a slaughter. And I think what you said about going to the Magnificent Mile and shopping and what a great city Chicago is, I think people are soon going to realize that even, in addition to the bloodshed and the cruelty and the violence, Chicago's corruption and the breakdown in the law enforcement is having a cultural impact too. I mean, people are leaving the city, and Chicago's a great center of culture in our country for music and art and literature. And all of that is going to be lost. And not only that, our markets and our economy. So it's a devastating loss to lose a big city like Chicago the way we're losing it now. And I'm hoping it's not irreversible, but I'd be honest with you, I have my doubts these days.
Well, why do you think that people in Chicago tolerate this current atmosphere? And we've had this atmosphere. Yes, it ramped up considerably in the last 6 months or so, and especially since the George Floyd situation. But in Chicago, again, we've had the gang shootings, we have the drug dealing, we have so much violence every week in Chicago. And yet people seem to, like you said, tolerate it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think people really do tolerate it in and of itself. I mean, there's a lot of signs that people have had enough of it, and particularly the signs that people are leaving. But I think that what's been happening in Chicago all the way since the late 1960s, and this is what I discovered as a writer, is that there's been the movement to turn criminals into victims and folk heroes, and to turn police into criminals. And this is a narrative that has taken root in the legal system, in the media, in the academia, and I think it's false, and I think it's very dangerous, and I think that's sort of where it's rooted. So I think that you know, these people who are at the core of this movement, you know, in the 60s, late 60s, they were very radical. They were very part of these radical groups like the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers, and they were not tolerated. By the end of the 70s, they were sort of ignored. But then a lot of them moved into the media, moved into academia, and they reinvented themselves, and they planted their roots in the media system and the legal system, and now they're sort of reaping the benefits of it. And I feel that the conservative movement didn't do a very good job of taking this on when they had a chance. And so now it's sort of come to a pitched battle, I'm afraid, in this country. But I don't think, the thing I point to is that with all the anti-police media coverage, people still have more faith in the police than they do the media. I mean, the faith in the media is at an all-time low, and they never bring it up, they never discuss it, but people aren't buying their stories anymore. And as a writer, I feel like an obligation to sort of fill that void and tell a different story as honestly as I can.
Well, and I think that what we've seen in Chicago is, the violence tends to be contained to, a few neighborhoods. It's not citywide. And there are so many good people in those neighborhoods that are just absolutely held hostage by the gangs. They don't really understand that they have as much control over their lives as they do. We talk about this in our training class. We talk about locus of control. People who are hopeless and don't feel safe, don't feel like they're free to make their own decisions. So you have people that keep, they either don't vote or they keep voting in the wrong people. They don't understand that they do have some control over what's happening in the city of Chicago. And I would imagine that right now, Chicago cops are starting to feel the same way, that you guys don't have a lot of control over what's happening. And yet you go out there every night, and I know what you do. You go out there every single night and you do your job, and you risk your life, and you talk to people, and you get involved in your communities. And yet what we're hearing from groups like Black Lives Matter and of course Mayor Lightfoot is that you guys aren't doing enough, that it's you guys who are the problem. What do you think about that?
I agree with what you're saying, and I think that the irony and the cruel irony of this movement is that the very people they claim to be representing and fighting for are the ones who are most suffering through their actions. I think there's a great falseness in the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's offensive to tell police officers Black Lives Matter. There's nobody out there every day in all the neighborhoods, not just the Black neighborhoods, trying to enforce people's constitutional rights, to protect their constitutional rights, to protect their public safety. There are bad cops. There are bad cops. There's bad lawyers. There's bad journalists. There's bad doctors. But by and large, the police go out there and they try and protect life, and they're sworn to uphold the Constitution. So for these people to come up to you and say, oh, Black Lives Matter, there's a great deceit in there. And I also think there's a great cowardice in it for them. But there's a lot of confusion in people's minds. People really aren't able to see who the good guys are and who the bad guys are anymore. Or at least they're not able to see it through the media and through other forms of the intelligentsia. So I feel, there's this great vacuum. I'm a writer in addition to being a cop. I think there's this great vacuum, and in this vacuum, there's a great opportunity. There's many great stories to be told. And I focused heavily on the wrongful conviction movement because I discovered that a lot of these guys they're letting out of prison on the claim that they're innocent is completely false. These guys are 100% guilty, and that these detectives who they're vilifying are being thrown under the bus. And but it's dire. It's dire, and I don't think anybody knows where it's coming. I'm afraid it's all coming to a head in this election. I believe that a lot of these demonstrations, which are really riots in Chicago, are sort of a preparation for the election. I think that both political parties feel that they cannot lose this election. that if they lose, they could be finished. And so I'm afraid that these riots are a warm up to what we're going to see in November. And I'm greatly alarmed by it. And I'm very nervous about it. I'll be honest with you.
Well, and I would agree with that. I just had a conversation with a friend today where I told her, you need to make preparations for November. That what you're seeing now is just, I agree with you, absolutely. It's just a precursor to what we're going to see on election day and post-election day. Really, frankly, no matter who wins, I think we're going to have more riots, more fires, more looting, more violence. And people who support law enforcement, they truly need to understand that, and they need to prepare for that. And law enforcement obviously is going to have to prepare for it too. But do you think that proactive policing is starting to go a little bit to the wayside, Marty? Not just in Chicago, but nationwide.
Yes, yes,
When we were
absolutely.
young cops, you're younger than I am, but when I was a young cop, and I know when you were a young cop, this job's a great adventure. Law enforcement's a fantastic job. It's different every single day. You get to help people, you get to catch the bad guys. There's really nothing better. And yet it's not so much fun to go out there and be proactive when you're wondering if you're gonna, tomorrow morning, are you gonna be on the front page of the Chicago Tribune and the CNN headline that you're getting indicted for doing your job?
Yes, I think it's had a tremendous impact on policing, and there's still guys out there doing a great job, but I think a lot more police are saying, "Hey, I'm not going to do traffic stops where I used to do traffic stops. I'm not going to do street stops where I used to do street stops. I'm going to go out there, give people a report, and say, have a nice night." And I think there's some cops doing that, but I think there's also a lot that, we still recover a lot of guns in Chicago. So that when we recover guns, that means guys are out there doing the job, and God bless them, but I agree with you. And I think this is part of the movement. I mean, part of the movement to uh, to attack the police is to keep them from doing their job. And I think the gang members really feel this. I think they feel like they've never had more carte blanche with a prosecutor like Kimberly Fox, who goes out of her way to drop charges and put them back on the street. I think they're more emboldened than I've seen since I've been on the job. And that's very bad, very dangerous. I mean, when the gangs are running the streets, nothing's good is going to come from that.
Well, and unfortunately, the gangs have had a real foothold in the streets, for the last 40 years, since I was a baby cop. And when you talk about somebody like Kim Fox, our state's attorney in Cook County, she has dropped more felony cases than any other state's attorney in history. And she has dropped, the system in Illinois, a lot of people don't know, just because a police officer arrests somebody doesn't mean that that person's going to go to trial. It doesn't mean that they're going to even get charged. That when you're talking about felony charges, it's absolutely up to that state's attorney whether or not this case is going to move forward. So as a Chicago police officer, you guys can arrest everybody and their brother, but it doesn't mean it's ever going to go to court. And I don't think people understand that. When you talk about, for example, the confiscation of guns and gun crime, that's always a big talking point. Is Chicago has all this gun crime and Chicago needs more gun laws. There are no more stronger gun laws in any city in this country than there are in Chicago. And yet you and I know what happens at gun court. They walk in and they walk out. Can you talk about that a little bit? Explain to people what really happens when we arrest somebody with an illegal gun in Chicago.
Yeah, well, what I always say, an unenforced law is no law at all.
Uh,
And so she grants bonds. She gives very low bonds. She gives I bonds. She has you ask any detective and they'll tell you now, when you call to get felony charges, they put you through this gauntlet. And if there's one little thing they don't like, they won't approve the charges. Whereas before she was in office, they would. And so now you're getting some detectives and cops say, let's not even let's not even go the felony route because we know it's going to get tossed. So those numbers are actually much, much worse than they seem than they seem at a first glance. So then along the way, she'll amend the charges and drop them down to misdemeanors, or she'll plead out. And before you know it, this guy's right back out on the street. And, you know what it's like. Getting guns off people it's high stress. And for you to go and get a gun off somebody who is a predator, is a gang member, and then to turn around and see him back on the street a few days or a few weeks or months later, you wonder, why am I doing this? And then when the same prosecutor is going out of her way to find ways to discipline or indict cops, or is relentlessly attacking them in the media, and calling them all, part of white supremacy and racist attacks. It's absolutely despicable. It's shameful. It's just, I think Kimberly Foxx is a measure for the danger this country is in. I have no respect for her. I think she is I don't believe a word she says about anything. I am very suspect about her political ties, how she came into office. And she's very, very dangerous.
And that's something else that I want people to understand. The Chicago way is different than really any other system in this country. And people don't understand. And just what you said with Kim Foxx, where did she come from? She just sort of appeared out of nowhere. She has deep political ties to, I'll just say it, to Kamala Harris, the Democrat vice presidential candidate. And the Chicago way of doing things is very, very dangerous for law-abiding people. And yet people don't seem to really understand that. They don't understand the system. Kim Foxx very much believes in what we call procedural justice, that some people need to just not have to pay for their crimes. And it depends on their background and their race and things like that. It has nothing to do with the letter of the law, or frankly, even the spirit of the law. And it's dangerous for law enforcement. And frankly, it's dangerous for the city of Chicago. It's for its citizens. And I'm not sure people really realize that. And, Chicago PD, you guys are a model for community policing. You've had the CAPS program. You've had so many great neighborhood policing programs. And yet here you are being told that you're, like you said, that you're racist, that you're not doing their jobs. And I know that has to be incredibly frustrating. Are you guys getting any leadership support these days? You've got some new leadership. You also have the Fraternal Order of Police, because, we talk about police unions. That's something else you're hearing about in the media. While the big bad police unions are the ones that are causing all these problems. We know that's not true, but talk a little bit about leadership. Talk a little bit about being a union cop.
Well, I think that right now that the movement that Kimberly Foxx was part of, these radical prosecutors that were supported by George Soros and put in these big cities, I think it's part of a larger plan. And part of that larger plan is a relentless war on the union rights of police officers, and they're really going after the fraternal, the police unions, and of course they have Chicago is a model of that. I believe that the founding fathers were the genius of the founding fathers, who believed in a system of checks and balances, because Chicago is a one-party state. And Illinois is too, and because it's a one-party state, there's nobody watching each other. There's no other party that keeps an eye on what the Democrat, so they pretty much do whatever they want. And that's why I think corruption is so rampant here, and why people get away with so much, and why Kimberly Foxx has gotten away with so much. So I believe that they're definitely coming after the FOP, the police unions. They're vilifying them in the media. They're throwing so many cases at the police. that they're spending a lot of money in legal defense. Then they're vilifying them for defending their officers. So I think that it's very dangerous where the unions are at right now. But I think that President Trump has been a great supporter of police and refuses to buy into the narrative. And so when you talk about leadership, I would have to definitely point to President Trump and his administration, and also the Attorney General, William Barr, who is just an outstanding job, I think. And I think there's a real resurgence. I think what happened under the Obama administration is that the legal system, the justice system became intensely politicized. And I think that you're seeing a restoration of a Department of Justice based upon evidence and law than as opposed to Obama. And I'm very encouraged about that. For our union in particular, I mean, I was beaten the last election. Our current president is very outspoken, very articulate, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. I think everything's on the line in this country. I think we're in uncharted territory, and I can't sit here and say everything's going to be all right. I don't know. I think it's stormy times ahead, and I think everybody has to put their head down and do their job. Which I do a lot of writing to try, and that's my forte, is to write. So I write and try and defend the police and be honest. I don't defend people I think are dirty cops. So that's I think where we're at. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
How do you think people on the political left, how do they defend, and they defend them to the death, teachers unions, and yet attack police unions?
Well, I think that that's something we're frustrated with. I think that unions in general who have moved along to the far left, like the SEIU and the teachers union, and who sort of toe the radical left party line, they are well taken care of. And the unions who are either more traditional or who have any kind of conservative ties like the police unions do, they're vilified. And the labor movement has been struggling for years, particularly the private labor movement. So a lot of the strength in this country is in public sector unions, and the ties to the public sector unions to the democratic machine are well documented and I think accurate. And so we're not part of that. And so we don't get we've gone over 3 years without a contract in Chicago. And the teachers went a couple of weeks and you'd think the whole world was falling apart. I mean, when they didn't have their contract for a couple of weeks, and they have been savagely attacking us. A lot of the teachers are part of this Black Lives Matter and these demonstrations that I would call riots. So if you toe the party line as a union, you get a lot of support. If you don't, you're out there and you're fair game. It asks fundamental questions about labor unions in this kind, particularly public sector unions.
Well, and police unions are different, and I hope people understand this. Teachers can strike, police officers can't strike.
Right.
And so that's why you're going 3 years without a contract. And that's, like you said, that's not what happens with teachers. And yet now we're seeing this big divide with labor. Only some unions are good. And I think that's also very frustrating to law enforcement, of course, not just in Chicago, but around the country. And Marty, you talked about President Trump, and we have never, you and I were both police officers under Barack Obama. He was also our senator. And he didn't like us as a senator, and he sure didn't like us as the president. And he brought that Chicago justice system to Washington, D.C. for 8 years. And like you said, William Barr is just now digging our way out of that and restoring the justice system. So it's not so incredibly one-sided. It's not so punitive, to one side. But talk about what it's like to have a president who he loves cops. There's just no other way to say it. And he was this way when he was, Donald Trump, the apprentice, and Donald Trump, the businessman. He was always so appreciative of cops. And then when he got on the campaign trail, all around the country, I had friends texting me pictures of him posing with police officers. He would spend an hour posing with police officers, and he never misses an opportunity to thank American law enforcement, to tout how good we are, and say, yeah, there's a few bad cops, but most of American police officers are damn good at their jobs. How does that make you feel?
Oh, it's terrific. I mean, being a cop is a hard job. It's hard psychologically, it's hard physically, it's hard on your health. And when you go out there and do what we do every day, settle these domestics and these chases, everything, and people are treating you like a criminal. It was the 8 years that Obama was criminalizing the police, and I believe he was criminalizing the police. It just had a devastating effect on policing. But I think that Obama was far more radically left than anyone held him accountable for. And I know you're starting to see. I think you're starting to see this with the scandals in his administration, and much of the public is not willing to look at it, I don't think, fairly. But I mean, if there was evidence of you doing what some happened in the FBI during this whole Russia hoax, you and I would be looking at jail time.
We'd be in prison.
I mean, can you imagine?
You and I'd be in prison for that stuff.
Warrant, making up stuff for a false warrant on somebody, you'd be down for the count on that one. But
absolutely,
the left doesn't seem to be upset about that kind of dirty cops, the evidence of that kind of a dirty cop. But anything else, they'll hammer you with a viciousness, particularly in Chicago. I mean, the worst media corruption in the country, to me, is without question the Chicago media. I mean, I am daily absolutely shocked at the moral depravity of the common Chicago journalist. I just can't believe the things they write about and what they say and the evidence they ignore and the lengths they will go to paint a cop evil and some depraved killer a folk hero. I mean, it is absolutely disgusting and shameful. And
absolutely. That's why people need to understand that they have got to seek out other journalistic sources other than the mainstream medias, the mainstream newspapers. When I was a kid, we lived and died by the Chicago Tribune. I don't pay any attention to it because I know it's so incredibly slanted, and it's going to be always slanted against law enforcement and against the criminals, like you said, which is so incredibly frustrating.
Yes, I remember the highlight of my day was to get up in the morning, get my coffee, and walk out and get my Chicago Tribune, especially on Sundays. I mean, I would read it all day long. Now I wouldn't pay 5 cents for that. And I just think it's one of the great. I'm a writer and a journalist. And I believe that the corruption in journalism far exceeds any corruption in law enforcement. And though they tell a different story, I mean, it's a upside down world, and the lies that they can get away with it. They really do abuse the First Amendment. They really do abuse the first. They use it for the most sinister motives. And it's really, as a writer, I love journalism. I grew up reading journalists. To this day, I love to read good journalism. Obsessively, I read it. And so, seeing what's coming out now and what's going on is it's really sad. It's really embittering, to be honest with you.
Well, Marty, we are so thankful that you spent some time with us. We're thankful for what you do. I wish you Godspeed, and I'll pray for your safety, man. If you'd like more information about the National Police Association, go to nationalpolice.org.